Welcome, everybody. This is Carl Hooker. I am a 21-year educator, not just in common with the title there, the 21 things, but I've been in education for 21 plus years. I've been a former school teacher, first grade, fifth grade, director of innovation, tech director, a little bit of everything over the course of my 21 years in education. I'm now a full-time educational consultant, speaker, and I would say public speaker, but most of that is now virtual speaking. So do a lot of different talks around the country, and I help schools out in terms of thoughtful technology integration. So hi to all of you. Thanks for dropping in on the chat there and telling us where you're from. This session is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube. So you will see the video of this live probably in about a day. If you want to come back and rewatch it or share it with someone, you're welcome to do that. I see we got people from California, from Hawaii, from Oregon, a little bit everywhere. And thank you for those of you that are joining live. I know it's kind of tricky in our schedules these days, especially with summertime here, but this is a fast and furious session. I'll go ahead and warn you. It's a lot of things to get through, 21 things every educator should do in the 21st century. So obviously we only have about a little less than 50 minutes, 55 minutes to get through it all. So I'm going to fly through them pretty quickly. I do encourage you to use the chat if you have questions, general things like that. If you're just not sure about something or just have some feedback, I'll be monitoring the chat kind of as we go along. And let me bring that up again right here. It looks like it's dropping off. There we go. Okay. So let's get this party started with number one. Now, the one thing I will tell you is I could tell already from the chat that there are people from all over education, so lots of different subject areas already in this group. And this talk is not intended for a specific subject area. My hope and goal with this talk is that you guys will get at least one item, one thing that you can use and turn around and use in your classrooms. I know there's all sorts of things you can do with technology remotely or in person, and I know that like some of the favorites that we usually go to are like doing presentations, whether it be PowerPoint or Google Slides or whatever. My hope with this is that I give you a bevy of different options of things that your kids can do to kind of produce and also demonstrate their knowledge and understanding. And again, not specific to any grade level or age. You'll see a wide mix of stuff in here. So again, a good win for me is that if you guys get out of this hour and you picked up one thing and you're like, well, that's something interesting I want to try out, then in my case, whenever I go to a session, if I can pick one thing out, that's always a big win. So hopefully you'll do that, be able to see it. Oh, we have someone from Slovenia, from all over. Yes, there we go. All right, so number one. This is the first one on the list, and it is something that we try to encourage our kids to do more and more often now, and that is participate in online debate. Now, at the moment, most of us, our only type of debate we can do is online. So there's not really much to say here, except that it is a skill that we definitely want to teach our kids. I think it's an important thing for them to pick up, because I think if you've been out or been a part of any type of online discussion board or thread or social media in general, you've noticed that there is a lot of discord online, and a lot of times even adults, we have a hard time managing that. So my hope with this is that as we pick things up and as we model different ways, this particular tool I'm sharing here is Padlet, which I know a lot of you have probably used out there. Yep, Nikki says Padlet's amazing. This example comes to me from a middle school, so a history middle school teacher up in Illinois, a friend of mine, Greg Kulowick, and he shared this years ago with me, and I love this idea. And it's the concept that you're going to put kids on an online discussion board to basically say, we're going to moderate this, but I want you guys to actually debate what is, like in this case, who has a harder job, the president or a pharaoh, and looking at historical context and what the pharaoh had to do versus the president. And then each student had to go in, and you could see their first names there, and they listed their reasons down. Now, if any of you have dealt with Padlet in the past, you know that it's also kind of a clunky system in terms of just being able to like move things around sometimes. They've now added some features where you can actually have it sorted into categories, which is a little bit easier. But one thing he shared with me that he did that I thought was a great idea too, is that he actually gave one student, you got to be careful which student it is, but you give one student editing rights, basically to say, you are the manager of this Padlet wall. So your job is to actually monitor it and make sure that, that the chat is appropriate, but also to, organize the categories into certain things. To make sure that everything's kind of clean and looks nice, and then he has to kind of come back with that report, or he or she will come back with that report. So again, pushing that bit of power, that little bit of ownership over to a student can be a powerful thing. We'll talk about that more as we go through the talk. But again, this is a great example of something you could do, by the way, in the classroom, live or virtually. So an idea for collaboration there with the Padlet wall. And of course, for younger kiddos, you've probably, many of you that are teaching elementary probably are familiar with Seesaw. So Seesaw, of course, can give you somewhat of a curated online debate. Not quite the same as it would be, like, say, on a Padlet. It's a little more free-flowing. This one's a little more teacher-controlled, but you, of course, can enable to where you can have students' responses be shown. And of course, what I love about Seesaw is that you could also go video or audio response. So for the little ones, that don't necessarily can type as much, it takes a lot for them to type a sentence. You could have them just do an audio response. Another example of tool would be Flipgrid would be another one. I know it's a Microsoft product there that's also pretty good for that now. In Flipgrid, you can do, of course, for responding video responses. Again, these are features you have to enable, but the idea is giving your kids a platform somewhere where they can have some sort of online debate. And I would start out very light. If you're a teacher out there that's like, I'm not sure if my kids are ready for that, start with something simple, SpongeBob versus, I don't know, the Smurfs or something. Give them a light topic to really get them going. The idea, again, is to give them the ability to actually have that discord, have that disagreement, and then figure out how to respond with each other online. Yeah, and then someone mentions in the chat that they had kindergarten kids that use Padlet, but they also love Seesaw. Yeah, yep, a great tools for student voice. And then again, the idea is modeling that behavior. So we as adults, don't do a great job of this. If you've been on Facebook anytime in the last few years, you probably noticed this. But the more that we can model this for our kids, I think is important. So that's number one. Number two is FaceTime with an expert. I'll also kind of throw in for number two is doing something called mystery Skypes, which I think some of you are probably aware of out there, that you've probably seen a mystery Skype. But in this case, this example actually comes to us from California, and this is a rural school in California. And what they did was, they didn't have a lot of access to local experts when it came to certain things. In this case, as architecture was a class that they were teaching art and architecture. And so the teacher had reached out to her brother, who happened to live in Chicago, and called him up on FaceTime, brought him into the classroom. This could actually be pretty easily done too in a virtual context too, if you think about it, just bringing in a guest speaker for if you're doing an online class. And then essentially what the students did is they started kind of creating or tinkering with their architecture design. This is the 10th grade, just so you guys know for age references. But again, you could kind of do this with any subject. So they tinkered a little bit there using Google Slides in this case, but you could use anything you could share with them. You could definitely do PowerPoint online and share as well. And the idea is they shared it with the architect, and then he gave them feedback, and before they actually produced their kind of final project there at the bottom. So again, just an idea of different ways you can do that. Yep. And then someone's mentioned in the chat too that Jamboard is another good one when we talk about that online student voice conversation from the previous button. Very true. And for those of you that don't know, that Matt Miller did do a few, has got some good ones that they're dropping in the chat, but lots of different examples of how you can use Skype in the classroom. Mystery Skypes, which I mentioned earlier, again, just real briefly, is the idea that you're going to contact some other school somewhere, and then over Skype, you're going to have a conversation to figure out, like, where are they from, where's their class from, and a lot of times it's really kind of fun, and it's a great way, especially with the younger kids, even for middle school and high school kids, to come up with critical questions, to really come up with ideas like, how do we actually understand where this person's coming from, and to learn differences in terms of different parts of the world. And it doesn't have to be that far, y'all. Like, I'm here in Austin, Texas. It could be someone in West Texas, and that can be a different world in a lot of ways too. A lot of you I see are from California. I mean, contacting someone from Hawaii, I mean, just that expanse is enough to give enough differences to say, like, what is it like? How do you celebrate certain things? So I like that idea too of bridging the cultural gap with FaceTime, and it allows you to do that in a lot of different ways. So I put FaceTime here. It can be any tool that lets you do virtual course meetings, which we've all become very accustomed to in the last few months. Number three, this is a little bit different. So using augmented reality in existing books. The first time I ever saw this done was with a tool called Erasma. I'll play the video for you here just a little bit. But essentially the way this works is, you're not going to hear the audio on it, but essentially the way it works is there's a, you have a book cover. Now that's been changed to something called HP Reveal, which I think has been changed again. But if you can tell in the video, what happens is, this your student basically does a report, and then you tag it on the book, much like you would a QR code, but you have to look for high contrast items to do that. So the idea is here, this student, of course, in this case, this librarian, this school, I believe, that's doing this is one-to-one Chromebooks, but the librarian had a few iPads around too, so they were able to use those for checkout. And essentially you go through the school, and any of the books up at the top are highlighted by students that have done book reports on them. So again, a great idea for just kind of embedding that knowledge on it. And so there's some trickeration on the back end of this, I'll admit. It's not as easy as it looks. You don't just pull up a camera and all of a sudden the video pops out. Take some work on that front. But there is some great power in it. And some people might see that and say, well, that's just kind of a neat techie thing to do. But think about this. I mean, if you had, for example, let's say every student, we were teaching remotely, and every student had access to this book, the physical book, like this book here called How Rocket Learned to Read. You could actually tag and put a video on that book. It doesn't matter where you're at. And as long as the students are subscribed and have the channel and have the means of which to pull up a camera and do it with an app like HP Reveal, you could actually have them pull up the video. Yeah, now that Flipgrid has this, it's even easier. The Flipgrid, it's a QR code, so you'd have to kind of send them the QR code. But that does make it just a little bit easier way to join it. And I don't think it's being supported anymore too. I think someone mentioned in the chat HP Reveal, and Metaverse might be the other one that I'm thinking of that's a little bit better, that's just come out and it's kind of revamped itself a little bit. These change quite a bit, guys, I'll just admit it, but a lot of the idea is, again, the main overall concept, don't get too hung up on the tools, but there are apps that'll do this for you. Another example I saw just recently was this one, and this is with a startup company, I believe, out of Sweden, actually out of Germany. And what they've done is they've taken old textbooks. This is called Arlupa. And they've taken old textbooks and they've said, you know what, we're going to refresh this old textbook, and just, you have this textbook lying around at home or lying around in your classroom. We're going to make, and they started with science, which is a good subject because it is very visual. And so basically what they do is you pull up their app, and then if you have the right textbooks that they support, they're building in animations for you. You can see the potential for this down the road. This is, again, as a startup. So, they may do a few books. But the idea is, again, with any book that has similar contrast, like in this case, you could build in those layers of animation, and it just gives something new life. So again, and some people see this, and like I say, they may think, well, that's just a neat techie thing to do. But I will say there is some brain science behind the fact that, seeing a 2D image versus a 3D image, seeing the motion there that's in this book, versus just looking at a flat image on a textbook, what it could do differently for you, is quite different than what you would see just in a normal everyday textbook. And then, of course, this is one of those favorites. A lot of you probably on the chat know. A lot of you have seen Merge, of course, has been around for, I guess, quite a while. I call it an old ed tech tool because it's been around for more than 3 years. So once it's 3 years, like, everybody considers it old as dirt, but it's still a very powerful tool. A lot of good uses educationally. Obviously, they've created their educational platform. They've got some free features that are still built into it. And and I don't know if anyone from Merge is listening to this, but of course, you can buy the cubes for $15, and sometimes they go on sale for $1. But you can also, what Merge does is they actually put a grid out online, so you can actually print the cube too. So in theory, if your kids are at home, let's say you're virtual teaching, and you have no way of getting them cubes, you could send them to a page. If they could print out the paper that actually is just like a little foldable grid, they could actually make their own cubes at home. And then again, using this is a different way of learning. So again, a neat thing in the sense that you're holding this in your hand, but there is connection to brain science about physically touching, moving an object and what it does for recollection versus just looking at a flat screen or a flat piece of paper. Here's another example. This is a little higher level example. This is, of course, looking at the inside of a beating heart. On a textbook page, you could see this with the links, and you could see the labels, and it looks, you could see it. That's great, but you're not able to hold it in your hand and actually see it beating. Being able to go in closely and actually look inside the heart, look into the chambers. That kind of a extra level of learning, it's a good hook, but it's also a good way to have kids, again, explore something that maybe that's not that interesting. It may be kind of a dry subject, but all of a sudden you jazz it up a little bit with some virtual reality, or in this case, augmented reality, to really have those kids kind of diving in there and looking deep into that heart chamber. Wow, really good and up close. And number 4. Again, we're going to be doing this pretty fast and furious. This whole video will be recorded, so if you missed something, you can, of course, go back and watch the YouTube of it. A lot of you are adding things in the notes too. Thank you for that. So creating infographics. Now, I have a couple examples of these that I'll share with you, but this one, I'm gonna use one tool in this case, but there's lots of different tools, by the way, to do infographics. You can do it you can use a PowerPoint slide and stretch it out. There's lots of ways to make a infographic from scratch. That can be pretty intimidating. If you just look at a very blank piece of paper and figuring out how am I gonna stretch this thing out. Of course, with a PowerPoint slide, you could just change the length of the slide to make it more of a long form infographic. The one I'm showing here is Canva, which a lot of you have probably seen for, it's a great tool for graphics and things like that. But again, the idea is giving your students a different way to communicate something that they understand or something they know. So instead of having them just create a PowerPoint, you say, you know what, I want you to take that information and take that knowledge, and I want you to build it out in a tool like Canva, which again is web-based. It's freemium. Most of the tools I'll be showing today are freemium, which means there are some free versions, things that you can do with the free, so you can get a free template like this person's doing, and really getting into super fluid helium, which I have no idea what that is, but this is the example of what they're sharing with me. But the idea is, again, to have different ways of representing information, representing your understanding. So it doesn't always have to be in the form of a PowerPoint or a paper. It could be in the form of something like an infographic, which, again, powerful concepts. This is called Canva, C-A-N-V-A. Canva.com, and again, integrates with Microsoft and Google. It's got Facebook integration too. I just like it because if you're a student or a teacher even that's kind of uncomfortable building your own graphics from scratch, they've got some pre-built things that you could use for Creative Commons that you could actually build on your own and readapt, like in the case of the video I'm sharing with you now. So you don't have to necessarily start from scratch. It just gives you kind of a template to build that icon. This would be a good starting point. If students really wanted to stretch themselves further, of course, they could start from scratch and build a blank one and just figure out different ways to represent their information. But again, infographics, another way to display information. The fifth one is Pecha Kucha. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Pecha Kucha. Yeah, Adobe Spark, Melanie mentions a great other tool. Yeah, I didn't have that in my list, but that is another great tool to use for representation of infographics. So you think about Adobe Spark Post, lots of things in there. Yeah, Pecha Kucha, for those of you that aren't familiar, I kind of give it away here on the picture, but essentially what it is it's 20 images in 20 seconds. And so, and that's what the idea behind this is. Again, your kids and your students, they're presenting information in a way that's not structured by bullet points and reading off the screen. The idea is they're going to present their information in a sense that is image-based and only for a certain amount of time. So they have a concise amount of time to rehearse, get that information out. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of kind of the idea of the three-legged stool of presenting, but essentially if you can imagine a three-legged stool, what you have there is, you know, one leg you have the content. That's one leg of your stool when you're presenting. The other leg you have is communication. That's how you verbally are presenting it. And then the third leg is the actual presentation itself, like how visually pleasing is it? Is it, you know, is it garish font with lots of bullets and things like that? Is it distracting, or is it just very simple and it kind of adds to your message? So a really solid presenter or presentation student presenter would have a very balanced stool in terms of their content is solid, the way they communicate is solid, and then their screen and the presence of which the presentation slides are very solid. I'm going to do an adaptation of this, and I'm going to do this live right now. It's called Pecha Flicker, and I don't know how many of you have ever been familiar with this tool. This is a web-based tool, so I'm going to actually have to drop out of my screen share for just a second. And I'm going to go to, let me get out of here. This is a web-based tool that is, so what it does is, and I'm going to warn you right now, it's total improv. So basically what's going to happen in a second, I'm going to pull up, let me pull up my slides here. There's Pecha Flicker right there. Okay. I'm going to have to go to full screen just so you guys can see this here. And here we go. I'll do it right there. All right, so here's how it works. I don't know if how many of you have seen Pecha Flicker. This one's crazy. So a friend of mine, his name is, he goes by Cogdog on Twitter, @Cogdog, Alan Levine. He creates a lot of these fun little widgets and games. This one's free. I will tell you a word of warning, they're pulling images from Flickr, so I don't know what's going to come up here in a second. I'm just going to do, let's just do, we'll do 8 slides in 10 seconds, so we don't have a lot of time. I want to make sure we get through this. So I'm going to do 8 slides in 10 seconds. Now, what I want you guys to do is in the chat, I want you guys to, someone give me just a noun, a random noun. It doesn't have to be dog. I'm going to basically do a talk about educational technology. And then you're going to come up with a random word. And whatever that random word is, it's going to start, I'm going to start getting slides on my screen. And I have to figure out a way to tie it into to platypus. Oh boy. Okay, we're gonna try this. Let's see how it works. If I can spell it right. Hope you got it right there. All right, looks like it worked. Okay. Oops, it looks like it dropped out of yours. Let me switch, let me pause it real quick. I might have to go full screen for this. This is going to be interesting. So what's going to happen is in just a second, the little wheels are going to spin in the background, and let me get this sharing right. It's going to randomly go to Flickr and pull images that are tagged with the word platypus. My job is to tie it into educational technology because I've already announced that as my topic, and I have no idea what's going to happen, what's going to pop up, but we're going to try it. So we'll see how this goes. All right, let me see here. There it is. Okay. So I've got a little few seconds here to go before it actually starts giving me my first slide. And now here we go. It's educational technology as it goes to platypuses. All right. So whenever you're dissecting or looking at technology and technology tools, you sometimes have to get really close and inspect them and see, like, what is it that is actually doing? And a lot of times, you know, it's fun, especially with friends. You know, you can kind of figure out different ways to find information together. It puts a smile on your face. You kind of don't know where you're going. A lot of times you have to kind of turn your head to a certain angle to really understand what's happening with the tools that you're using or the technology that you're using to figure out how to make it work. You know, but in a lot of cases, whether you're struggling, you might just have to plow ahead, so to speak. because, you know, there are times when you run into that kind of brick wall, and there's times when you have to take a deep dive into the learning and what's happening there with the tools, because it's not always going to be just surface level, right? You got to really kind of dig in deep there. You know, but really it's about the kids, right? And it's about what are they learning? How are they sharing? You know, what are the things that they're getting out of this, and what kind of tools are they picking up from it? And I think that's an important thing to remember. And so when you actually do take a breath and kind of come up to the surface to see like, okay, all these things that I'm learning, all these tools that I'm doing, what does this all have to do with anything? You really have to get a second, you get a second there to think, okay, this is interesting, because in the end, when you finally dig down deep and kind of sit and reflect and pause and think about everything you've done and learned, it really is all about learning. All right, that was weird. Platypus, thanks Tyler for that. I'm not getting any reaction, so I have no idea what you guys are saying in the chat. You're just like, oh, thanks. Okay, good. That was, yeah. So Pecha Flicker. Yeah, always a crowd pleaser. Let me go back to the share, and I'll tell you a little bit about the back end of this too, just so you guys are aware. So yeah, again, the tricky thing with this tool is that you're not going to be able to you don't know what's coming, right? And so, and I'll be honest, I've seen things sometimes where it's filtered fairly well. I mean, Alan has put in filters in place, but I've still pictures like maybe image someone holding a beer, or maybe there's artwork that looks a little questionable. So I would be careful with this. I wouldn't do this one with I would only do this with older students or other adults. It's kind of a fun activity to do. But on the back end of that, there is a way to hack this. And I've seen teachers do this in a hack form too, where basically they create the slide. So you go out and you find images of something, let's say a word, the banana or something, you make up a word, and you basically create 10 slides that have banana in them. And you make maybe 5 or 6 of these different decks. So maybe one with bananas, one about avocados, one about cats, whatever. And then you have the students, they have to go in and pick it, and then you just hit random. So you play your PowerPoint, hit random, and they have no idea what's coming. You do it on a time slide. In this case, I did it every 10 seconds. You could make it longer. I would honestly tell you that it gets a little uncomfortable if it goes more than 2 minutes. Regular Pecha Kucha, where they're actually designing their slides, that's a solid one to do in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. But Pecha Flicker, where it's completely improv, you'll get some students that'll freeze. But the idea, again, is don't focus so much on what your bullet points are. It's really to help them with the communication. It's really to help them with how does the image actually curate the message. And I will tell you a quick story about this too. I had a superintendent I was working with who was just starting out in his school. And he told me, he's like, man, I really want my teacher's a little bit nervous. They don't know, like, I want them to be able to take risks. And then I was coming to do a talk with his staff that day. And he goes, what's a way that I could kind of demonstrate to them that I want them to take risks? I was like, I need to know. I've got the perfect thing for you. And it's called Pecha Flicker. So we put him up on stage, and he did a 1 minute, 40-second one. And I will tell you, it was pretty rough. But actually, the more he failed, the more his staff like laughed and endeared themselves to him. So even in this one, like when you're like, some random image comes up, like, I have no idea what that is. It's still funny, but it also kind of engages the audience. The audience is very leaned in at that moment. So I think it's just a neat tool to have there in your toolbox. And again, for younger kids, I would encourage you to design your own slide templates ahead of time. It takes a little bit of front loading, but once you've got a few built up, or better yet, have other students design them. And so you have the students go out and they find the images, and then you kind of curate all that into a slide deck. And you could have that also where you could have random kids say, all right, my word is basketball. And so someone's built a deck with 10 different images that have something to do with basketball in them, just to kind of throw them off. I think that'd be kind of a fun thing to do too. Number 6, and I see we're flying right past, and we've got to get through a lot here. So this will be good. Number 6, this is students tracking their own learning. Again, if you talk about, I don't know if any of you have ever done any of reading with John Hattie and his research when it comes to actual student ownership of learning and the importance of what that means for actual retention and understanding. And he's got a whole list of, I think, 133 things that affect learning, and everything from like class size to the temperature in the room. But one of his number one things is that ownership of learning. And so if kids actually track their own learning, track their own fluency, track their own typing. We used to have in my former district, we had a typing program that we paid quite a bit of money for. I won't name it, but after doing some research, we discovered like we could have the kids go to these free typing programs as long as they did their own self-tracking and share that back with the teacher. So we had a shared document where the student could share back with the teacher. It actually meant a lot more to them. So they would go in and do their own little like 10-minute kind of practice on one of these free typing programs and then self-track. And then the teacher was able to check their fluency and check their tracking of typing based on the reporting of that. And then she had little tests for them to do where they had to type paragraphs. But that was so much more powerful than a paid program. Again, sorry if some of you work for those paid programs out there, but I just like that idea of student ownership when it comes to anything, when it comes to maybe math growth, science growth, the things in this case, fluency of reading, how fast their words are getting. I think that's just another powerful tool to put in your toolkit. Number 7, information and contemplation. This is all about practicing mindfulness and focus. And I know a couple of you were on my chat my session I did on Monday. I brought up the story where I had my daughter's second grade teacher started to actually integrate some mindfulness into her classroom, and she saw amazing gains in terms of just productivity and focus. Because she struggled with the students when they got back after lunch. There was a lot of misbehavior, there was a lot of inattention, a lack of focus. And so what she did is she decided to start putting 1 minute in every day. 1 minute of class time was just dedicated to this. And here's an interesting story. Side note is that she actually continued this practice through COVID too. So as my teacher or my student would meet with her in the classes, she would still have them doing like a 1 to 2 minute mindfulness thing, even during Zoom calls. So I think it's important to know that. This gentleman here, I'm just going to point out, he's from the University of Washington. He's done a whole course on information and contemplation. And it's a great story. I went and researched him a while ago. And one of the things he did is he would sit there and he'd set up that little bowl in his classroom. And he has 300 of these college students coming into his room. And essentially what he does is, all right, guys, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start kind of making the sound with that little gold bowl there, make that little humming sound. And then what I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to raise your hand when you think it's been 5 minutes that you've had your eyes closed. And so he does this. And so there's 300 kids, they all get in the room, they all close their laptops, they close their eyes, and they sit there, and he starts making that sound. And he goes, all right, like I said, raise your hand when it's been 5 minutes. It was about 2 minutes in that the first hand goes up. And nobody else is seeing this. He said, just keep your hand up. If you raise your hand, don't look around, just keep going. We're going to tell you who can get closest to 5 minutes. By about 3 minutes and 45 seconds, the entire class has their hand up. Not a single student got close to right on the 5 minutes. And part of his reason of practicing this is saying that we live in such a fast-paced society that we need to take these pauses and learn how to practice just that idea of mindfulness and being in the now. And so what he did is, and as I looked at more of his research, is he continued this practice kind of throughout his semester. And actually, by the end of the semester, the students were stretching to more like 10 minutes. So where they were actually craving that time to just shut down, turn everything off, and get really refocused. The first few times it's very uncomfortable, I'll admit it. So it's hard to practice, but we're going to do it right now. So like anything I like to do, practice what you preach. So here's what we're going to do, guys. Yeah, and I would say Laurel, just in the chat said, starting with 1 minute with younger kids is absolutely the way to go. Best practices never start with 5. Start with 1 minute, kindergarten and up. And then if you can stretch to longer than that, my daughter's second grade teacher went to 2 minutes, which was probably the farthest that she could go. So let's try this together. I'm going to put up kind of a pleasing image here. I want you to go ahead. You can close your eyes or you can leave your eyes open. And I want you just to kind of look away. Take your eyes off the screen if you need to, or keep focusing on it if you like the image that I have up there. And I want you just to take a deep breath. And I want you to breathe in and out. Let's do like a 5-second breathe in. And then hold, and then breathe out. Let's do that one more time. 5 seconds in. Hold. And then breathe out. There's a lot of things in our minds, a lot of things that we're thinking about, everything that's happening around us. It's important for us to clear that away, and at least to try this once a day, even if it's just 30 seconds or a minute. Practicing it yourself can make your life a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more productive. And I think that's important for teachers, but it's also important for our students. So I feel a little bit refreshed just doing that. I don't know about you guys, but of course my voice lowered as well. And I could also just look at this image probably forever, but we're going to switch to the next one. So there is research behind this as well. And so I don't want to say like just, throw this out there and try it, and it's great for your kids and for your brain. There's actually a lot of good research behind this. Now, these are the examples you're seeing on the screen here are really with very practiced mindfulness masters. So we're talking what a normal person's brains looks like in terms of the brainwave patterns and focus and function versus like 15 minutes of mindfulness. Again, that would take a long time to build up to. So don't feel like you need to just turn that on tomorrow. And all the way up to 25 minutes. I would say that there's even measured gains with 1 minute or 2 minutes. So don't feel like you have to kind of get to this focus of centered energy or centered focus, but this is kind of what the brainwave syncs look like before and after with that kind of neurocommunication, what's happening inside your brain and that kind of focus and mindset. Go Noodle. Kathy mentions also calm.com and also Go Noodle. They do have some mindfulness meditations. Um, and I would say, I'll talk a little bit more about practice with this. A lot of it's going to come when it comes with your students. You're going to have to, you kind of get to know your students a little bit better. Like I said, with my daughter's teacher, it was more of the afternoon. She noticed it. And what she saw immediately after that was at 1 o'clock, she's like, if I can do this at 1 o'clock, I've got 2 hours left in my day. If I can do this for at least 1 or 2 minutes. And she noticed that the afternoon was a lot smoother. The behavior problems went way down. They were able to get complete. It was math was what they were doing in the afternoon. They were able to kind of complete their work at a lot better rate. They seemed to be a lot more focused and attentive to what she was saying. And it's hard. I know a lot of you that teach higher content levels, especially high school and middle school, you're probably thinking, well, I don't have time to do any of this because we got to get through so much content. The truth is it's actually very valuable, even if you just squeeze in a minute with your students. And doing it on a Zoom call, you could do it too, just like we just did. Again, at first, it's going to seem uncomfortable, and it just will for the first couple of weeks that you try it, but just continue to kind of build on it. And I think if it's a part of your regular everyday practice, that's why they always say the word practice mindfulness. It's not ever a perfect thing. Just continue to practice, and I think there is some value to that too. School counselors, yeah, are also good for that. Bell ringers, someone mentioned too in the chat. Yep, lots of different times you can do it, whether it be to start your day. I like that idea. Was it Melanie who said that in the chat? Yeah, get your students started first thing, like, hey guys, we're going to get started. Just want to say hello, but just before we do that, let's go and do our little mindfulness activity. So I think that's a great idea there. I've got 28 minutes to get through a whole bunch more. So here we go. So mindfulness was great there because now we're going to have to fly for a minute. By the way, I plan a lot of these too. You'll notice some of the breaks and some of the things I do. This is all purposeful, and I'll talk about it in a minute when we get to a little bit more about brain research and movement. But even when I do these talks in person, I don't ever just stand on a stage and talk at somebody for 60 minutes. There's a lot of interactivity happening. And in a screen, in this sense, I'm talking to you guys on the chat, but we're also taking a break and pausing. Number 8 is fly a drone and discuss its impact. This is a little bit harder. Not everybody has access to drones, but this is an example of, like, I could replace the word drone with any type of newer technology, something that's new, that's out there, that is going to have some sort of impact. It could be self-driving cars, things like that, where you want to really have kids think about what is going to be the long-term and short-term impacts of this new technologies that get introduced. Because I feel like it's important for kids to be mindful, again, of what all this new technology does. They see something like this and they think, great, I can fly my pug around on a drone. That's awesome. But really, they need to have better thoughts and conversations. And particularly something like a drone, which is, has some negative connotations. In terms of, like, people could use it to spy on you, it could track you and do all these things. But in this case, like, this is a group from Sweden, and what they've done is they've basically designed, they've programmed these drones to create a rope bridge that can hold human weight. And within 5 minutes, now they sped up the video pretty fast here, but within 5 minutes, all of a sudden, you could have students, you could have actual full-size adults going across this. So if, say, there's a collapsed bridge or a structure that was out, you could have them actually walk on these bridges. So again, there are some impacts, positive and negative, of anything with technology. And I think it's important, again, like I talked about the first point, is to have that talk and discussion and argument about what's good and what's bad and why. So one example I'll share here is, this is actually me in a middle school classroom last year. And my friend Rich Lombardo is actually flying the drone. You can see him over at the desk there. He's got a little Whoop drone there. It weighs about 2 ounces. Put the camera looped in. We tied it into the actual screen there. So, of course, the kids see it and they see themselves on the screen. They get really excited. And this is like, oh, this is fun and engaging. Yes, that is true. It is fun and engaging. But the idea was, it was a hook. It was to talk to them about what is the impact of this new technology, and what is it going to have. And then we put it up on the wall as questions, like, we wanted them to actually write to their legislators about either side. Because at the time in Texas, they were considering legislation about drone regulations. And so students wrote how they felt about it. And I'll be honest, like, you probably know this as teachers, a lot of students kind of voiced or mimicked the feelings or beliefs of their parents. So a lot of them, one of them parent was a lawyer and was like, no, there's privacy laws that we got to worry about and things like that. And one student had a really great example where he said, what about, like, I have a little tree house in my backyard. And I said, yeah, can you see over your neighbor's fence? He said, yeah, I can. I said, is that illegal? And he said, well, I don't think it is. And I was like, well, what if you flew a drone up in the same spot and looked over your neighbor's fence? He's like, well, I think that would be illegal. And I was like, I mean, that's the gray area. So having those kind of discussions is important. So I think, like I said, the word drone can be replaced with anything that's emerging technology, but I think it's important to keep that kind of present in the minds of students, because a lot of times we see toys and tools and gadgets and get all excited, but what's the long-term impact of these? And so I think that's an important discussion to have too with kids. Speaking of one of those tools, I mean, virtual reality is a huge one right now that's kind of taken off everywhere over the last several years. A lot of you have probably done something with virtual reality, or you're taking a virtual reality field trip. I think all we're doing are virtual reality field trips because we can't take an actual physical field trip. So this isn't that like, wow, Carl, that's great. Yes, we've all done them now because that's really the only way we can travel. So lots of different tools out there. Again, I'm not getting tool specific, but I mean, Google Expeditions. One I've shown in the past that I like is Nearpod. This is me kind of teaching a class with first graders. So there's lots of different VR tools out there that are free that give you some built-in navigation. Another couple ones you might want to think about. One's called RoundMe, RoundMe, and it's a kind of a lighter version of virtual reality. But again, you can search different places, and it's just web-based, and there's some free things you can do there. Another one is ThingLink. ThingLink has been around for a while. ThingLink, but they do have a 360 degree now, ThingLink 360, which gives you some 360 features, which then, of course, gives you the ability for the students to upload their own images and make their own 3D 360 degree pictures, which is kind of a neat thing for virtual field trips as well. And again, yeah, an old tech tool because ThingLink's been around for 5 years, so we've we've put it in the old category, but it does continue to do some great things, and I love it again because it's web-based, mostly freemium, which means that it doesn't. I don't care what device you use. You'll notice like that with everything I talk about, I try to make it as device agnostic as possible, so it doesn't matter what you're using. But if it's web-based, that means you could probably use it on just about anything, of course, as long as you have the internet. And this kid here, I always love this. When I went back and watched the video later, I saw his face, and I was like, "That is, it's super engaged right there." He's so into like, look at that. There's an eel underneath the. We're looking at. I think it was the Caledonia Reef, which is actually going through some issues right now. So we were kind of looking at it. Another tool. So let's say you want kids to actually create their own virtual reality. So in one sense, virtual reality tours and field trips is great. But there are a lot of museums and different resources you can definitely pull from, as MM mentions in the chat. I will say that a lot of that is very consumptive, right? So you're sending the kids off, they're going off and they're exploring, and they're just kind of consuming everything they see, and then maybe the outcome is they create a report or an infographic or a video or something about what they learn. But how about creating their own virtual worlds? Now, there's a couple different tools you could use this with, and so I'll mention the first one here. This is panaform.com. I don't know how many of you have seen this. I ran in this guy. It was at an event called South by Southwest here in Austin a couple of years ago, and he was just sitting at this booth, and he has a little card there, and I was like, what is this? And he's like, it's just a little website I made. You can take this grid here. You can kind of see the grid on your screen. You download it and print it, and you can color on it, or you can do it digitally, but he said he liked it if you just printed it. So again, this is mixed medium. So now what you do is you color in the grid, and I'll just show you an example of what happened. We did this with my daughter's 4th grade class last year. We actually made virtual haunted houses. So the kids color them, and then you upload them into a device. It could be a Chromebook, iPad, whatever. And then you can basically move around and see what happened to your 3D world. So here's an example. So again, that's me. Yes, sorry, up close. Kids are just coloring using markers. They're designing their worlds. And then when you upload it, now you've got a 360-degree grid that basically they just uploaded from an image. So again, some math there, some art there, really pulling it in. You can build these grids out even bigger if you want. There's I've seen art teachers take those poster printers and actually expand the grids a little bit larger so you can get some really finite detail. But the idea is you're taking something flat and then making it all of a sudden 3D. So just another example of something you can do. By the way, you can do, here's a secret, you can do pretty much any image and upload it to Panaform. So if you wanted them, I've seen someone do this with PowerPoint, where they extended their PowerPoint slide out fairly wide and narrow. So they made it kind of like a 600 height with like a 2000 width. And they put a whole bunch of things on it. Then they exported that slide as an image. You can upload that image, and all of a sudden it's a wraparound image. So you can see everything from 360 degrees. Kind of a neat, different way to look at something like an infographic. Do they need to stay on the grid lines? The grid lines are there for more a suggestion. It does help. You can see that kid up in the upper right corner there. I kind of tell them like where the ceiling and floor will be. So from that point, in his case, he's putting a bunch of green goo coming up from the floor. But the grid lines do help. It helps clean it, makes it a little more wraparound. It looks a little better. I've tried it without, and it doesn't look right. So the grid lines kind of help with that. And there's lots of different versions of it that are out there. Of course, the next level of that would be taking something like CoSpaces EDU. Now this is digital versions of your virtual world. So now all of a sudden you've got your grid out there, you've dropped it in, you've picked your environments. CoSpaces EDU, for those of you that have seen it and used it, it's web-based, it's freemium, again, that favorite word. So you've got some free tools you can use. You can pull in some icons that they give you. I will tell you now, they've kind of restricted some of the icons to make them paid only. But here's the neat thing about this. Now you're taking this to the next level. So the other thing you can do, by the way, is you'll see an upload button down there in the bottom left corner, which means you can upload any image, which means a kid could actually draw a picture and just upload it and make it a little icon in here or make it a little avatar. And so what they're doing here is this is drag and drop programming. So in this case, they are going to have the stepmother say something. So it's programming virtual worlds. And those of you that are out there are going like, wow, this is just too intense. I will tell you, I'm a very techie person. And it took me about 30 minutes to figure out how to make a little bird fly across the screen. But I handed this to, it was a fifth grader. I handed it to a fifth grader and I said, can you help me with this? I'm trying to figure out how to make this work. 10 minutes later, the fifth grader figured it out. So for me, it wasn't about the technology. It was more about, I wanted them to demonstrate something. In this case, you can probably tell what they're doing. They're recreating the story, Hansel and Gretel. But again, using that drag and drop coding, this is good, I would say third grade through about eighth. And after that, it probably is a little bit too light for anyone beyond eighth grade. But again, you can actually import your sound files. You can have them record sounds into it if they want to. That drag and drop coding is great and a powerful tool. I will tell you again, like with anything I'm showing you today, this isn't for every kid, and this particular tool especially isn't. I've seen some people look at it and just get confused with it. But there are certain kids, and you might know those kids, that take something like this and they absolutely run with it and they fly with it and they create their own worlds and something you would never imagine. So again, another way for them to produce something to understand, like, hey, I want you to take that concept that we just learned in history, and I want you to generate a 3D virtual world, and then it's a link. And so once it's a link, you can send it to all of your students, and all the other kids in the class can actually experience his or her world that way, which is kind of a neat thing, a neat idea there. Number 11, I want to make sure we're staying on time. Okay, 18 minutes, we're flying. Got 10 to go. Student entrepreneurialism is another thing. It doesn't have to be just for high school, but the idea is, again, creating a concept. So I'll give you a quick example. And on the screen here, you'll see there's one program here, Incubator EDU. I don't work for them or anything like that. That's just the one that we happen to use at our high school. There are lots of other ones out there you can do. But essentially what you're doing is you're kind of doing kind of a design thinking concept. And I'll talk more about that in one of the next steps. But in this case, what they do is the students form a corporation. First day, they get a group of 3 or 4 or 5 students together. They go around, they ask questions for the first 2 weeks of school and figure out what are some problems we need to solve either locally, whether it be in the school level, at the local level, at the state level, or at the country or global level. And then they have to tackle on one of those problems and create something that actually does that. So it's not just a practice exercise. And then what you see here, these are actually adults. These are investors that are coming by to actually hear the pitches of these students. And we had a formal pitch night at the end of the year. Our first one was in 2017, done these every year since then at Westlake High School. And I'll just show you a little bit of the slide here of someone actually doing these. It's crazy to watch this because these are actually some of my former elementary students when I was actually a computer lab teacher in their school. So now I see them as seniors. It's pretty crazy. But however, like in this case, these students came up with, there's an issue here in Austin where a lot of females were jogging down a certain track. There's a certain part of town that's a little darker at night, and a couple of them were getting assaulted, and they started seeing kind of an increase in that case. And so they decided to create their own solution. So here's what they did. They took the idea behind a taser and they built it into an actual physical glove. And here's the kid actually demonstrating the prototype. And so basically you click it on, and then when you close your fist, it creates a spark that will then jolt anybody around you. So he ended up building this out into a glove that was a little easier to fit. And of course, you got to be careful not to shock yourself. But the idea is if you're running down this path and someone grabs you, you don't always have time to grab like the taser from your belt or the pepper spray. So you click on this glove, turn around and blast the person, and they just go flying because it's a stun glove. So again, an opportunity for them to create something that's going to actually solve a problem in the world. And I will say one other thing about these pitch nights. As I always recommend with people, I always tell people, I tell the story, like in this case, we had 35 different teams, but on pitch night, we only allowed 5 of them. And somebody asked me why, like, why don't you let all 35 teams go? And I'll be honest, if you know anything about startups, 92% of them fail, and not all the teams were great. And we told them, like, you know what, you're going to complete it, you're going to get your class grade, but only the best of the best. And we're talking the teams that could present well, but also had a really good concept and work well together would be the top 5 getting up there to pitch. And I think it's a good lesson for them to learn too, because not everyone's going to get a ribbon in life, right? We know that there's going to be times when you fail, but how do you overcome that? And some of the teams that failed the first year came back the second year, they kind of rebuilt themselves and actually came up even stronger. So I think that's a good lesson for them to learn too. So anytime you can build in that entrepreneurialism into your classroom is important. Number 12. Student-led podcasts. I've seen a lot more of these popping up, which are great. This one particular one comes from a school that I work with in Chicago. This is Western Springs D101 outside the suburbs of Chicago. And what they basically do is they have their own little podcast channel. and the students write the scripts, they do the interviews, they think about what's pressing, and then they get in a recording studio and basically record them. Doing this now, of course, virtually, they had to kind of pivot and do this more via like a Zoom call or something like that, where they could actually record the audio that way. But essentially, they're still able to do it even remotely. But again, student-led, student designed, student created. And again, another way to get that news out there. And what's great about this particular one, this is a middle school, junior high, and they have a lot of parents that subscribe to this. So whenever there's important information that needs to go out, the principal, the assistant principal says, hey, make sure it goes out in the podcast as another form of communication out to mom and dad. And they get to hear it from the voices of their own kids. So again, takes a little bit of setup, a little bit of work. There's a lot of easier ways to do this now than there used to be, because it used to be really hard to get into iTunes. But you can use things like Stitcher and Audio Boo, a lot of different tools that are out there to help you do student-led podcasts. Another, again, great way to demonstrate knowledge and understanding too. By the way, this does not have to be outward facing. If you just want them to record something like on a Flipgrid or on a Padlet wall, some way, or even on a Seesaw, some sort of audio response, that's just another way to demonstrate what they understand. Number 13, and we're moving pretty quickly here, is use a digital portfolio to reflect. One I particularly love. I don't know if you guys have a lot of digital portfolios or if you're using those out there. Some people just put things in Google folders, and I think that's one way to do it. But it's nice to have an outward-facing one. So the best that I've come across so far is this one called Bulb. It's at bulbapp.com. I don't know if you guys have used them before. Very web-friendly. It works on all devices. You can put pictures, videos, text, just about anything. You can embed stuff in it. This particular link you see here, mrhook.it/bulb, will go to Bulb Portfolio, an e-portfolio site launched by a good friend of mine, Tech Chef for You. She's Lisa Johnson, and she has a whole series of things where she talks about the use of Bulb. And we actually used it for professional development as a way for teachers to actually reflect, because I think that's important to note too, that when it comes to learning, reflection is a big part of that. So a lot of the things that we struggle with as teachers is we kind of fly through so much content that we don't actually give the kids a chance to pause, reflect on what they learned. And so what this is more about is using e-portfolios as a way to understand the process and really appreciate the process more than the product, if you will. So again, that's Bulb, B-U-L-B. And if you look at it, bulbapp.com, freemium again, so free for teachers. And you can have some free accounts for your students. I think they're moving to their paid model is just going to have a little more feature rich, but I think you can do most of the things you want to on just the free one. You can have so many collections. I think it's 10 collections, which you can put into different things. So students can have a collection for every class. If you're talking high school or middle school, art teachers have used this quite a bit because again, it's very visual. So another tool out there for you. And we got 7 to go, and this always goes fast. So design thinking for empathy. I mentioned a little bit about design thinking just real quick. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this folder. Thank you, by the way, Nikki, for dropping that in the chat. The design thinking for empathy. So this is a great story. I don't know if you guys have heard the story. It's been passed down through the years, but there's this truck that gets stuck under a bridge, and like all these people come out and try to figure out how to get rid. The engineer comes in. He's like, what we need to do is we need to break, cut off the bridge at this point and raise it up. And then the firefighter comes in and says, no, we're going to cut the top of the roof off the truck. And then of course the 12-year-old walks up, and what does he say? He says, well, yeah, why don't you just deflate the tires? So sometimes with design thinking or anything, we bring in our own prejudices and our own kind of background. So it's always good to have that fresh set of eyes. And so with design thinking, the idea is, of course, you empathize. Those of you who've ever done anything with design thinking, Google search this and you can find these 5 things. But basically, you empathize, you think about what the problem is, you try to take on that empathy element, which we're always trying to teach our kids to do more of, define what that actual problem is and ideate it. And so you come up with several prototypes, again, just like in the Shark Tank idea. And then you test that prototype, and then you retest it, and then you retest it, and you retest it before it goes to something like launch. And again, this could be done in any forms or fashions. This particular one here, I'll just show you an example. I don't know if you guys have seen this video. This is from thefuntheory.com, thefuntheory.com. They've got tons of these out there. This is a great way to get your kids kind of pulled into the idea behind design thinking. So again, define the problem. How can we get more people to take the stairs instead of the escalator? And they come up with several different solutions and ideate, but eventually they kind of land on this one here. And I don't know if you've ever seen this video, went viral a few years ago. They have lots of other great ones on here too, but essentially like we're going to take these steps and turn it into a piano. Yep. And then the next day that people show up, and you can't really hear the sound because I'm talking over you, but the idea would be, again, oh, now all of a sudden it's a little more interesting because it makes sound when they go up. And so people start choosing the stairs a little bit more. So again, outside the box thinking here, you've empathized, you've thought about the problem, you've defined it, you've tested it. And now you're actually getting actual data. And I think that's important too. I think sometimes we come up with neat solutions, but are we actually monitoring and checking the data? And so at the end here, they actually tell you a little bit about the data behind it. Oh, there's a little one going up the stairs there. And of course, dogs, adults, kids, everybody trying different things. This reminds me of that movie. There you go. 66% of people than normal chose the stairs. So good data and outcomes. And they've done lots of other ones too. They did one, I think it was like swing sets, where they put these giant swing sets in front of this office building, and they had people, it would play music if you swung on it the right way. So a lot of people had to get on the swings. So you had all these people in office ties and dresses and stuff getting out there trying to swing in swings. Again, different ways to have a behavioral change. In this case, let's call it the fun theory. So there you go. All right, we've got a few more to go, and I've only got about 9 minutes, so we're going pretty quick here. Integrating movement into your classroom. We're going to do this quickly. I want to make sure you guys have time to do it. So I do want us to stretch. It's been 50 minutes, and so what I want you to do is go ahead and stand up and stretch just a little bit. I'm going to do it with you. So I'm going to pull my microphone back. And what I want you to do is, if you can, I know one of you is holding a kid, so this may be tricky. Lean over a little bit to your right. Now you guys are seeing my shirt. Lean over to a little bit to the left. There we go. And then kind of do a little bit of a runner stretch to the right. And then a runner stretch to the left. Again, movement in the classroom, so important, just to get you up and moving. Even just if you've been sitting at your desk too long, this little bit of stretching helps. Now I'll see if you can lean over. We'll do a couple more real quick. Lean over, reach over. And again, just 30 seconds of this or a minute of this gets the blood flow going to the brain. I'll stretch over to the other side. And I'm just using simple icons here. That one's pretty blurry. I mean, I found these on Creative Commons, but there's ones you can find just to kind of direct that. All right, here's our last one. So if you could stand on your head. No, I'm just joking.
No, I was really about to, Carl. I was about to.
I wanted to see that. If someone's going to do it at the end, that would be awesome. Real quick on this, though, the research behind it is, again, brain research goes behind this. So anytime you have any type of activity, you can see the brain, the reactions and how active the brain is that increased oxygen flow after a 20-minute walk. The same is true for kids, and kids, require some sort of break about every so many minutes based on their age. So if you're teaching kindergarten, I saw someone in the chat you need to be thinking about how do you pause and take little breaks for 5 minutes. That doesn't mean get up and do a jumping jack every 5 minutes. It could be like, all right, now what I want you to do is go get out a piece of paper and I want you to draw a picture. I want you to turn and talk to a neighbor if you're in your classroom. If you're doing this remotely, you make them pause and go run out and get something. Okay, I want you to go find a crayon, and I want you to go find a piece of paper. Get them to pause and do something. That kind of transition is really all you need. But I do like the idea of having kind of a guided stand and stretch. And these are just, like I said, I would have been fun. Well, we had someone to do that at the end. We've got 5 to get through in 5 minutes, so I don't know if we're gonna have time. We got 7 minutes, so we should be okay. Fake news invasion. Of course, fake news has been out for a while, but this is before current leadership. But we've heard this before. This is Abe Lincoln, which I think is interesting that he said, it's been, the problem with quotes on the internet, it's hard to verify their authenticity, which I think is interesting. Of course, you put this in front of kids and they're like, wow, did he really say that? I was like, yeah, well, I found this on the internet, so it must be real. But it's been around forever. I mean, if you think about it, ever since there's been mass broadcast of anything, whether it be newspapers or in this case, this is, of course, you guys remember the War of the Worlds. This is before a lot of our times. This is 1938, where essentially a radio show that was an entertainment-based show was thought to be news, and people thought that the aliens were actually coming down and attacking us. This is a website I used to use all the time when I used to teach my digital literacy class. I know that help save the endangered Pacific Northwest tree octopus from extinction. A real website about a very fake thing. In fact, they've even got the little guy there in the pine trees, and I guess, he flies around like a helicopter from tree branch to tree branch. But the idea is, again, to think just because it's on the internet, how do kids actually authenticate and realize like what is real when it comes to news sources and information, .coms versus .orgs. So letting them kind of establish that there needs to be more than one source of information. Snopes is another one, going in and actually seeing if something is real or not. By the way, adults, we could probably practice some of this too. I've seen some stuff on Facebook lately that's not always true. This is an interesting image. I'll just share this with you really quick. This is actually shared with Stanford University freshmen, and 80% of them got this wrong. And the question was, is this photo, first of all, is it real? And second of all, is it actually in where it says it is? So up at the top, it's kind of hard to see, but it says Fukushima nuclear flowers. And this was Fukushima, Japan in 2011 had a nuclear power plant meltdown. And down at the bottom, it says, and I'll kind of zoom in a little bit on it. It says, not much more to say. This is what happens when flowers get nuclear birth defects. And so looking at the image, looking at the header, the question that went to these students is like, is this an actual picture from flowers in Fukushima, Japan? And then we told them, yes, it's a real image. It's not been photoshopped. And they said, oh, then it must be true. So 80% of them said, yeah, it must be from there. Of course, the truth is, if you look at this image, there's nothing that tells you where this is taking place, except for the header and what it says at the bottom. And the truth is, this is a known birth defect amongst flowers in Sweden, around daisies. But I think what the more important message is to say is like, you still have to discern, even though if it's a real photo, like where did it actually come from? And now with deep fakes, you know, the videos and things, it's even more important than ever for kids to kind of research that a little bit better. All right, 4 minutes to go. We're going to go through these last few super fast. This one is stop motion, using stop motion for anything. I love using stop motion for science. Again, taking something, a dry subject like digestion, and saying, you know what I want you to do is I want you to create a stop motion using just a piece of paper and your desk. And I will warn you, those of you out there that are looking at this going, wow, this is great. It does take quite a bit of time. Each one of those is a photo, right? Every time you take a picture. So it's definitely something that's a good capstone project. It's kind of an end of the unit summary, where you want the kids to have a different way, again, of displaying it. Instead of spending a week building some sort of presentation that they have to give, maybe they create a stop motion instead, and they can of course do a voiceover narration of it. I'll go ahead and skip. I don't want to show you the end of this, because if you know anything about digestion, it doesn't end well. So we'll stop it right there. But you get the idea. Again, stop motion for science is a good one. Another one I like to do, and I've mentioned this in the past with another presentation I did, is using robotics to tell stories. And I think there's lots of different ways you can do this. The one example I'm going to share here is one that people probably don't know very well, and it's trash bots. This is a kind of a low-cost engineering. What they do is they take, they've got kind of a green message. So what they do is they take, you take recycled bottles and popsicle sticks and things like that. You get their little widget, and you can program it on any type of web device. It doesn't have to be a tablet, it could be anything. And then essentially you can program it to do different things, tell stories, make sounds, move around. They have lots of little challenges with it too. It's pretty neat. But again, the idea is robotics don't just have to be for STEM. They could be for lots of other things. It could be for language arts. It could be for lots of other things. I know Sphero also has some of that built into their platform. They got some free stuff on their educational side where you can actually have the robot tell stories and recreate stories and things like that. That's another good one. Ozobot's also good for that, as someone mentions in the chat. Thanks, Nikki. Yep, last couple here. We got about 3 minutes. Doing pretty good. Student social media teams. This is depends on what your district policies are. I'll go ahead and warn you on this, but what we tried is we took some fourth graders. I know this is crazy. Fourth graders, they're not 13 yet. And we had a teacher basically be a lead for them, and she created these little press passes for them. And essentially what they were doing is they were going around and capturing all of the things that were happening in the schools. So a lot of times we have track and field days or special visitor and things like that. And if you're the one person in the school that's job is to document all of that, you're running around like crazy. So what she did is she gave them, she had them go out and capture images, type up blogs, and then she did the final blessing of it before it went out to the web. So they weren't able to actually post direct to Instagram or Twitter, but she did have them actually do everything, gather all that evidence, and then they basically brought it to her, and she was kind of the editor in charge. But again, great for those students that really want to get out there, and maybe those early journalism students, another way to capture things. And then also it helps you on the back end in terms of your school and your district, because it gets a lot of that positive message out there of all the things that you're doing in your schools. So a great way to kind of put students to work there, things that they enjoy. Last two, creating makerspaces. I know there's a lot of them out there, so I'm not going to go through all of them. You know, you can use anything from cardboard to Legos. There's lots of different ways you can do makerspaces, 3D printers. I'm going to show this one particular tool because I absolutely love it. It's called Chibitronics. And again, I don't work for any of these people. I come across them and love them. I'm like, oh, this is cool. This one actually I bought for my daughter because she's kind of like into the science. She's my 11-year-old. She's going into 6th grade, and she loves science and she loves art. And I thought, you know, how can we cross that over? So the way this works is with Chibitronics, you get a kit and you can do, you can buy some of it pretty cheaply. Like some of it's like $10 to get the electrical tape and the little batteries and the LED lights. The book itself that they're doing it in is kind of a tutorial book that takes you step by step on how to use it before you start kind of creating on your own. But essentially what you do is it teaches you the idea behind circuitry, you know, in a way that's not going to actually hurt the student. So there you go, you got your light, it's lit up. And then it adds a little art to it and you get a different idea right there. So again, the idea is you mix art with some of the circuitry, and there's lots of different examples. They've had big giant murals that they've created. But I love this too. There's a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer one that lights up. It's pretty neat. There's some that are pressure based, some that are voice based, and it teaches them how to go through step by step how to design the stuff on the back end. So again, great for those art teachers out there, or science teachers out there looking for something a little bit different. Chibitronics.com is a where I picked this one up. I can find them on Amazon too, a little bit cheaper. And the kits, like I said, $30 for the kit, but I think it's 10 if you just want to get the supplies. So not too bad, but not free either. Last one, we're right up against it here. Let students drive their own learning. And I think this one can be done with any tool, anytime, any place. Doesn't even need to be technology, but I'll give you one last ending story here. This, by the way, I say this one for the end because it is the hardest. It's giving that ownership of control. You may have noticed throughout this talk, I've been saying this could be something that some students would enjoy, or this could be something they could have some choice in. I always believe in that idea that students get that voice and choice, and they get to take that ownership of their learning. And this particular last story I'll just share with you is one when it comes to websites. And actually, I didn't talk about building websites, but that's another way, again, for kids to kind of demonstrate their understanding. These are a couple of kids here. These two girls here, fourth graders that I used to work with. Now they're seniors, juniors now, I want to say, in high school. And the one there on the right, she's actually an aunt. She is 10 years old. She was an aunt to a little 2-year-old. Her older sister had a little baby. And so his name is Dylan, and he had this disease called Krabbe's disease, which is a neurodegenerative disorder, and it's fatal. And she was trying to get figure out a way to earn money to basically help with the cause, help with medical bills and the research. And so she did what most kids did, right? She created a lemonade stand, and that's great. But she, after the first weekend, came back to her mom and said, this just isn't really working. We got a few people, we got maybe $50. That's great, but we want to make this kind of build this out a little bit larger. Can I build a website? And her mom's like, well, yeah, your uncle's a web designer. She's like, no, Mom, I got this. My teachers and I use this tool called Weebly. And I don't know if you remember Weebly, it's still out there. To use Weebly to build their own websites. And essentially what she did is she took this image and basically created her own website. There's a little guy right there. And there's a couple little buttons you put on there: donate to Dylan, and then donate to Hunter's Hope, which is the larger kind of example there, the larger organization that kind of deals with Krabbe's disease. And then what she did is she kind of made it really easy. She made more information on them. She had a way to actually go through and organize a lot of other 10-year-old and 11-year-olds that wanted to help. And she said what she decided to do is she went out and did traffic pattern analysis as a 10-year-old and figured out like where the best intersections were, and had kids go out and create lemonade stands across the city of Austin to donate to this cause. So again, that little bit of power, we given her some of the tools in the background, the understanding and knowledge that she could do something with the tools, but then that ownership at the end to say, I'm going to take this over and do it myself. And I think that's just a powerful thing. And I think it's something important for all of us to remember. So that's 21 things every educator should do in the 21st century. These slides available at carlhooker.com if you want to go check that out. I've got a lot of my slides up on there. Again, this video will be available on YouTube shortly thereafter. So I'm going to drop out of the screen here just so I can see everybody real quick, because I never know what people are doing on the background there. But thank you guys so much for being a part of it. That was a little over an hour there, but we did a pretty good job. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now.